Hey guys, so in the introduction video, I just shared with you some resources that you could use whenever you approach Bible study. Today we're going to jump into Titus 1, and I'm not going to explain everything that's happening in Titus 1, but just give you some quick snapshot overviews to help you get started as you study, especially if you get stuck of knowing how to go about studying. One of the first things that I noticed in my Bible whenever I turned to Titus is right under the title for me in my Bible says there's an introduction to Titus on a page later in the Bible. In your Bible, you might have a little page right before that that explains a little bit about Titus, or maybe you have to go to a study Bible or some kind of online resource to find some information. When I flip there, in mine, it tells me that this is a pastoral letter from Paul to Titus and was intended to offer encouragement and wisdom to Titus as he endured ongoing opposition from the ungodly and from legalists within his congregations. Paul instructed Titus to complete his assigned job of establishing overseers, or elders, for the churches under his care. And then he goes on to explain about more of the context of what was happening there. And so as you look at Titus 1, you can see that even just kind of from the editorial marks that are there, there's two major sections. The first major section is verses 1 through 4. This is the greeting. And a lot of times we just breeze through the greeting because we don't see a lot of specific information right there that we necessarily think is important, but we couldn't be more wrong. There's a ton of important information found just in those 4 verses. It tells us who wrote the book. It tells us usually who it was written to. It tells us a little bit of that background information. So notice in verse 4, it even says, it's to Titus, my true child in common faith. Well, that's kind of a term of endearment there, right? We get this idea that Titus was probably being discipled by Paul. And so that's an important piece of information for us to know about the relationship between Paul and Titus as he's writing this letter to him. So take time to look through those first 4 verses. Underline key words or things that make you pause, or if you have a question about something. Maybe there's something about this greeting that reminds you of a greeting in another book of the Bible, and you can compare those. Then we have this huge chunk of information from verse 5 to the end of the chapter in verse 16. This is a whole section about qualifications for elders. So, since you already know that you're going to be looking at some qualifications for elders, be prepared to take some notes. Jot down some ideas. Right here it says in verse 5, this is why I left you in Crete, so that you might put what remained into order and appoint elders in every town as I directed you. So right away we see the purpose of the book that Paul was writing to Titus. But Crete is important. It's important that they tell us where they are. So you might go back and try to find some information about Crete and what was happening in Crete at that time. And then he lists the characteristics. If anyone is above reproach, the husband of one wife, his children are believers and not open to the charge of debauchery or insubordination. For an overseer, as God's steward, must be above reproach. He must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent or greedy for gain, but hospitable, a lover of good, self-controlled, upright, holy, and disciplined. He must hold firm to the trustworthy word as taught, so that he may be able to give instruction in sound doctrine, also to rebuke those who contradict it. So right there we have this list, and sometimes we just read it and we move on and we say, okay, I've got it. Take pause, write the list out. If there are words that you're not entirely sure about what they mean, go look them up. You might also read it in another translation. One translator might have taken one word and explained it one way, and another might explain it another way. So I might look in my NIV to see how they translate it. Then I might look in the CSB and see how they translate it. Sometimes it's even neat to look at something like the Message, where it's going to be a little bit more of a looser paraphrase, but still you get this larger context of what all of these scholars and theologians have translated this text as. Then, in verse 10 through the end of the chapter, you basically see the opposite, what you're not wanting. And again, you can make those lists and you can write out those words. And as you're writing, you're also retaining the information. You're also taking it inward and reflecting on it as you journal through it. So in chapter 1, you really get to just focus on those qualifications, but don't neglect those first few verses at the top that really set this whole book up.